Two of the last three World Series winners have come from the National League East. It's been the home of the last two NL MVPs and is the current home of four of the last six Cy Young winners. It's star-studded, and it's going to be a veritable gauntlet for the Braves, who will enter the 2022 season with that target on their backs as world champions and winners of four straight division titles. This is battery-powered Cory McCartney along with Grant McAuley. And Grant, if anything summed up this division this offseason, I think the optimum word has to be hectic.
Yeah, it certainly was. All of baseball really was, though, because the lockout didn't allow you to have that normal flow that we've seen on the hot stove. And I'm sure there's still guys out there looking for jobs right now. Maybe we haven't seen all the final pieces be put in place before opening day, but we did get a lot of movement. We got a lot of action. We got some big contracts. We got the Mets spending like crazy. We got the Phillies adding on, the Marlins adding on, the Nationals adding on. Really, everybody added. And then, of course, you got the Braves, and we talked a lot about their offseason. So we'll focus a little bit more on the other clubs. But I would say this, Corey, it's an improved National League East, but I really don't know how much this has really shuffled the deck, though.
Yeah, so for today's exercise, we're going to get into our power rankings for the National League East. We're going to go by lineup, rotation, bullpen, and then our overall rankings for the division going into opening day. So let's start things off with the lineups here. Grant, if you're going 1 through 5, what's your order and why for the National League East lineups?
Well, I got lots of notes for this one, and I'll say this. I think that the Braves have the best lineup, and much of that is because even though they lost a big player, they gained a big player, and, of course, they're going to be gaining Ronald Acuna Jr., and I just feel that 1 through 9, the Braves have the best lineup in the National League East, and it's going to be one of their big strengths this year. There's no two ways about that. Secondly, I think the Phillies have a good lineup. They've added some serious stump. Defensively, I don't think they're going to be great, but they're going to hit some. And in that ballpark, of course, they're always going to be dangerous. Then I've got the Mets and the Mets and the Nationals. With the Marlins also improved, I don't know that there's a ton of separation between necessarily Washington and Miami. I would say the Mets are probably holding into that third spot because adding Starling Marte for me gave them a dimension that they haven't had in a while. And they do have some talented players, but they're also going to have to find out, hey, is this Francisco Lindor the vintage that we saw early in his career in Cleveland? Or is he the guy that's really struggled to find consistency the last couple of years? That's going to be a big question for them. If they've got to revitalize Lindor plus the other pieces they have, I think they could make some serious noise at the plate. But that's how I've got them. The Braves, the Phillies, the Mets, then the Nationals, and the Marlins, but not a lot in between those two teams at the bottom.
I hate to, not really include any drama here, but I have the exact same order you do. And, with the Braves, I mean, I think about, obviously, Freddie's gone, Matt Olson steps in. Last year we saw that infield almost set a, record here in terms of 30 home run seasons out of everybody. Obviously an opportunity to do that again. You need to think about the outfield, bringing it back, Marcell Ozuna and what he's capable of. I mean, he's got a 30 home run season on his resume. Eddie Rosario has one on his, obviously Adam Duvall does. And then when Ronald Acuna Jr. is back, I mean, who knows how good things are going to be. But I think the Phillies are really interesting. You think about Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber coming in. They signed 7 free agents, spent $204 million, the 5th most in the league. That offense already has the National League MVP and Bryce Harper. They have 5 players that Steamer projects at 23 or more homers, 4 to have 30 plus. So I think they're going to be really good. Obviously, the Mets, you mentioned it. They bring in Starling Marte along with Eduardo Escobar and Mark Canha. They're going to be – this was an offense. I mean, don't forget last year, owner Steve Cohen was tweeting about how bad the OPS was for this team. They go out and got a little bit better in that department. I think they're going to be a much more even keel offense, especially, if Francisco Lindor can get back to his old ways. The Nationals, I mean, if Ronald Acuna Jr. is 1A, is the best player in this division, Juan Soto obviously is 1B, but inexplicably, they go out and get Nelson Cruz on that 1-year, $12 million deal. It has an option for 23. We'll see if he's even there past the trade deadline. It's just, there's just not a lot to be excited about in DC outside of Juan Soto. At least Nelson Cruz gives them something else to latch onto there. But I don't think we spend enough time talking about the Marlins and give them credit. I mean, they go out and sign Jorge Soler. And you think about that offense, there are some nice pieces there. Jazz Chisholm Jr., they've got Jacob Stallings, who won a Gold Glove last year, Miguel Rojas. I have the exact same order as you, but I would not be surprised to see that Marlins offense maybe be a tick up. And I think they're going to challenge as one of the better, underratedly so, offenses in this division. But to me, that Phillies lineup is going to rival the Braves in terms of racking up runs this season. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, it certainly could be. And keep in mind, the Marlins made a couple of other kind of, I'd say, sneaky additions as well. They got Joey Wendell, who's very versatile. He can do a lot. They spent a bunch of money on Evasiel Garcia, and then they went out and got Jorge Soler. Jazz Chisholm's the guy that I think is kind of the one to watch there in terms of somebody who could go from establishing himself with a pretty good season last year to taking a step up and perhaps being the all-star representative for the Miami Marlins. That wouldn't surprise me at all. It's a good young club that was supplemented itself with some veteran hitters. And that's why I would say that they're not too far off of the Nationals, which is actually more of a compliment than you'd think it was, even though I ranked them fifth, because the Nationals have one of the best hitters in all of baseball in Juan Soto, and they added a very capable DH in Nelson Cruz. It's just once you start to step beyond that, there's not quite as much for the Washington club to hang its hat on. But if you got Juan Soto, I'm going to go ahead and give you some credit because he is a very special hitter and figures to be that way for a long time.
As we move on to the rotation, starting off here, I mean, I think when you consider the potentially historic 1-2 that the Mets have in Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, they're at the top of the heap for me. But, we're going into opening day with a lot of question marks from this group. Jacob deGrom obviously shut down whenever he does come back, from the shoulder issue. It's going to be a month or so before he's able to get back into shape to be able to pitch in a major league game. Obviously, Max Scherzer is dealing with a hamstring issue that may or may not be something to watch. He said he's dealt with it before, but, they got Chris Bassett as well, Carlos Carrasco, Taijuan Walker. And then, after that, there's some question marks. Are they going to go out and add? They've been trying to pry Chris Paddock away from the Padres. We'll see if they're able to do that. But depth is going to be an issue with that Mets rotation. I still have them as the number one rotation, though, in this division because they do on paper have that 1-2. I've got the Braves number 2 there with that strong trio at the top of Max Fried, Charlie Morton, and Ian Anderson. Then the Marlins, that really young core that they have. I mean, Sandy Alcantara leads that group, and this is a really bunch of special young arms. Pablo Lopez, and Rogers there, Tyler Rogers. We know that they have a lot of potential. Then after that, I think the Phillies last year, Zach Wheeler was second in the National League in pitcher WAR. So certainly him and Aaron Nola at the top of the heap there. We've talked about Ranger Suarez before on the show, and I think he has a lot of potential down the line as well. And then, I think you've got a major drop off though when you get to that Nationals group because Steven Strasburg, who knows when we're going to see him. So, again, I think we're going to say this a lot about the Nationals this year. What are you excited about watching with this team? But for me, I think it goes Mets, Braves, Marlins, Phillies, and Nationals in terms of the National League East rotations.
Yeah, on paper, it would certainly be the Mets. But if you're talking about Jacob deGrom with another injury that could keep him sidelined for quite a while, that's troublesome. They did go out and get Max Scherzer. If that's your number 2 starter, man, is that not an embarrassment of riches? But he's also nursing a hamstring injury. We'll see how that plays out and if it even affects him long term. And, Father Time is undefeated as well. And we saw Max Scherzer unable to go to the post for the Dodgers when they needed him against the Atlanta Braves in the NLCS. So I don't know. I'm not going to take anything away from the overall resumes of those two guys, but it might surprise you. I know we're talking about it on paper right now, but in execution, this group, I don't think that they're quite the number one without deGrom. So I'm actually going to do something that I'm almost nervous about. I'm a little more bullish on this Miami Marlins rotation than maybe most people are. So I'm going to give them the top spot for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, with Alcantara up there, also Pablo Lopez, and I think some of the other young arms, including Rogers, Jesus Luzardo, who's kind of been an enigma thus far, and Eliezer Hernandez. Those are some great talented pitchers. If they put it all together, I think that's the key to the Marlins taking a big step forward this year, maybe winning 10, 12 or more games than they did a season ago, pushing themselves to 500 or better. That would be a pretty incredible feat. And that group is going to be the one I think that makes it possible for them. So I'm going to give them, as of right now, the way I'm feeling today, the top spot in terms of the talent, just ahead of the Braves, which I do feel like does have that great trio. And I'm saying this again, just so it's clear, without deGrom, the Mets rotation is not the same. It's pretty obvious, but I want to make sure it's out there. So just in case this comes in and I have to give a deposition about why I would make a crazy choice like this, I just have some questions about Max Scherzer. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit too skeptical because they're the Mets and because things happen to them every year that just don't seem like it should. It's possible, it's fair, but It's just kind of their brand. So unless or until that changes, then I'm just going to give the Marlins group maybe just a little bit of a push to the front of the line because I think they're that good. And I think there are some questions at 4 and 5 in the Braves rotation that go beyond just simply saying, hey, we've got a good starting 3. You do have Charlie Morton. You do have Max Fried. I think they both have a certain pedigree. Ian Anderson is still establishing himself, even though he's an incredibly talented righty. And then there's 2 spots really up for grabs, and 3 if you think about the way things are in April. The Phillies, with Zach Wheeler leading their rotation, I think they're strong, but I don't know that they do enough to really push beyond that. So it's a weird lump of teams that I put together here, and maybe I'm crazy for picking the Marlins to have maybe the best rotation, but I'm just thinking about how this is going to play out over the course of 162, and I think they've got the horses to make a serious impression regardless of what my rankings say, and who cares about what my rankings are.
So, but here's the thing with the Marlins. You got Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, and Trevor Rogers. Then you got Jesus Luzardo, who showed promise in Oakland. If he develops in Miami, and they're obviously going to give him time and room to do that, and then you think about Sixto Sanchez, he's facing shoulder issues, but if he can come back, there are fewer question marks with the Marlins 1 through 5, I think, than there is with anybody else in this division. So, you know, we may end up giving you your flowers by the end of this year when the Marlins do end up having the best. All right, so let's move on to the bullpen. Obviously, you know, the Braves made big waves this offseason with some acquisitions there. Do they have the best bullpen in the National League East?
No doubt about it. And this is even in the wake of the news about Luke Jackson, that, you know, you don't want to lose one of the guys that's really been a contributor to at least a couple of your teams that have won the division the last 2 years. And I think adds a lot of overall character and that dynamic. Those guys were successful, A, because they're talented, but B, they all had this camaraderie, this brotherhood. That's where the night shift name and mentality came from. And we saw what it did for the Braves last year. But man, if you've got to lose a Luke Jackson, who was a useful reliever, it's pretty nice that you went out and already signed Colin McHugh and you brought in Kenley Jansen. You've still got that lefty trio. You've got Darren O'Day, who's got a pretty good resume as far as his career is concerned, trying to find himself, back in the big leagues and back to being a useful reliever. And then there's some young arms that I think could be big impact in the Braves rotation as well, in the Braves bullpen as well, if that's what they choose to do with Spencer Strider, maybe Huascar Ynoa, among others. They've got to sort out the last couple of spots in the rotation, and whoever's really not in the rotation mix, maybe they become the long reliever. So I'll get to say that they're in the bullpen and not just starting pitching candidates, even if that's what they've done in the minor leagues. But yeah, I think it's the Braves at the top of the heap. Then I go down and say the Phillies. They went out and added some useful relievers. Maybe they move into that second spot just ahead of the Mets. The Marlins, there's not a lot of big names that you know of, but they've got some guys that were better than not last year. And then, of course, Washington, I just feel like most of their offseason outside of signing Nelson Cruz was just going out and not just getting warm bodies, but not really making exciting signings that you would think might vault that team up 5, 10, 7, or more wins in the overall divisional standings this year. Just not a lot to get excited about. Yeah, they brought back Sean Doolittle, but, that's a move I would have been excited about 5 years ago.
So you gave the Marlins love in the rotation. I'm giving them love in the bullpen here. I think obviously the Braves have the best, bullpen in this division, and maybe even all of baseball. I think them and the Dodgers and the White Sox are going to be those 3 that we look at the end of the season, and those are going to be your top in all of baseball. But I think the Marlins are a group that does not get nearly enough attention. You think about last year, they had a top 10 bullpen at the end of the season. They were 7th in F4 overall, 3rd in the National League. Dylan Floro, Anthony Bender, Zach Pop, Richard Blyer, all had solid years. Floro ranking 7th in Fangraph WAR in 15 saves. Blyer and Bender were top 25 relievers in the National League. So I think this is, to me, they could, if you take what you think their rotation is and me with this bullpen, they may, at the end of the day, have the best pitching in the entire National League East when you stack that rotation and bullpen up together. But, I think obviously, the Braves are going to be the top, but I think the Marlins are right there behind them. The Mets, they went out and made another deal here where they were able to get Joely Rodriguez to go cross town from New York, from the Yankees to the Mets. They bring in Adam Ottavino. Edwin Diaz rebounded last year, had his best season so far in New York. But I think, there's the guys that they're kind of hanging their hats on, or still have been on the downtrend of their career. So I don't really think that they have that lights out guy in New York right now. And this continues. I think if you look at the Phillies, they have two gigantic weaknesses. They are relying on guys who are horrible defensive players to head up their offense, especially in the outfield. And they have just made some really bad moves in terms of what they're doing in this bullpen. I mean, they got past their prime, Yuris Familia, Corey Knebel, and Brad Hand. And then you mentioned with the Nationals, warm bodies. I mean, Sean Doolittle, Tyler Clippard, Will Harris, Steve Cishek. If this was 2015, we'd be all excited about it. But this is 2022, and these teams are going to be in horrible trouble. So I'm going Braves, Marlins, Mets, Phillies, and Nationals in terms of the bullpens.
Yeah, I guess, as I look at it really just sitting down, I mean, on paper, the names that the Phillies got, they do make me feel like at least they tried to address their issue. It wasn't necessarily as much of a open tryout feel or, the movie Major League as maybe what the Nationals are doing. In some cases, despite the fact they have one of the best players in all of baseball, they hadn't really put a lot else into it. They're, of course, relying on Steven Strasburg to rebound in their rotation. They're relying on Patrick Corbin to look like a major league pitcher who can get guys out on a consistent basis after signing a huge deal. That didn't happen last year. And why am I talking about their rotation if we're talking about the bullpens? Well, I think it's going to put more stress on their bullpens when they got to cover for injuries and inconsistencies. And I don't know if probably a third of the innings that Patrick Corbin threw last year might have just been because, look, man, somebody's got to wear it tonight. And we can't run, 6 innings out of the bullpen every 5th day. That's just not going to be a realistic type thing. But he allowed 37 home runs at an ERA approaching 6. Obviously, a losing record as the Nationals were well below 500. But I guess I felt like the Phillies at least looked at what their weakness was out there and went and got some guys that have done it before. They're not on the upward trend, but I felt like they were at least net positives when you talk about the group of relievers that they did bring in. And I don't know, maybe I like Edwin Diaz a little bit more because he finally showed that, that form that was a little bit more reminiscent of what he did in Seattle. And the Marlins, maybe I'm discounting some of the names out there because they're not the most exciting in the world. But as you pointed out, and as I pointed out with the rotation, it may not be the biggest names, but there's a lot of potential down there in South Florida. They have added some players and some pieces that a young team needs. And we'll see if this is an overall step forward for Don Mattingly's club.
All right, let's talk overall power rankings as we go into opening day. The Braves have won 4 straight division titles. Who's the best team in the National League East going into the opener?
It's still the Atlanta Braves. I think they're the most consistent. I think they're the most well-constructed, and they're the team that's been doing it. So unless or until that they come up short of that goal, and the first half of last year made us wonder if maybe this was going to start a period of uncertainty in Atlanta. Well, the answer was no in the second half. And some of that was built on the fact that the New York Mets could not hold together their big lead into and after the All-Star break and into the second half. The Phillies didn't have a big enough push. And obviously the Nationals and Marlins were teams that were losing 90-plus games. So I still think it's the Braves. And we can talk a little bit about what we think the prediction of the finish is going to be, I guess, in a moment. But for me, as I said at the top, maybe not a lot's changed in the order that these guys are stacked up in. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, my projected finish for this division is going to be Braves, Mets, Phillies, Marlins, and Nationals. I think the Marlins are the ones that, again, and I think we keep having this conversation year after year as this young core that they've built, gets a little bit better year by year. Obviously, they're a team that made the postseason during the pandemic shortened season. I think they, with an expanded postseason field, who knows? Maybe they do jump up. Maybe they do challenge the Phillies. But I think it's going to be, Braves, Mets, and Phillies are going to be going at it here. Think about, the fact that Fangraphs has the Braves projected at 93 wins, the Mets at 89, and the Phillies at 88. I think this is going to be the tightest race in all of baseball. We'll see what happens with that Mets rotation as the season unfolds. Mm-hmm. If DeGrom misses a really extended period of time, maybe we're having a different conversation. I think the Phillies can outslug with anyone. I just don't think they have enough pitching. And certainly, the Mets have an offense that is more than capable. And on paper, and when they're, if they're optimum form, that pitching is going to match up with anybody. I just had the fewest questions when it comes to this Braves team. So to me, it's going to be the Braves on the top at the end of this season. And I think the Mets and the Phillies are going to be battling right there to try to make it really, really tough on Atlanta to get 5 in a row.
Yeah, I mean, that's what mine looks like. It's got Atlanta at the top. It's got the Phillies and the Mets kind of side by side with one of those big arrows that says, hey, it could go either way. It could be either one of those clubs that steps in front of the other one or steps back because of injuries, inconsistency, or just plain old attrition, whatever that might be. But I have a hard time, despite the fact the Mets have a payroll that's approaching thresholds that were put in place to keep teams from spending this much. Clearly, they've put a lot into this club, but they just have not been able, despite winning the offseason and doing those kinds of things. I would say, at least as far as NL East clubs the last few years, they haven't been able to step forward, grab first place, hold on to it, and be there when the smoke clears and the dust settles on game 162. So I got the Phillies and Mets kind of neck and neck. I think the Marlins will be the club that steps forward the most. I think they can challenge that 500 mark. Can they get beyond that? I don't know. I think the lineup's still kind of limited. They're going to lean heavily on their pitching and the rotation, as I said, and the bullpen, as you said. They've got a lot of promise there. But the Nationals, meanwhile, I mean, again, I've already said some of the questions. Is Steven Strasburg healthy? Do they have enough firepower outside of Juan Soto and Nelson Cruz to put up enough runs? And even if Steven Strasburg is healthy, is there enough on that pitching staff to put some consistency together to win, at least at a 500 clip? And I don't think there's a way around another 85 or 90 losses for the Nationals as currently constructed. And they just don't really seem to be trending in the right direction, despite the fact they won the World Series not just a couple of years ago. So they're heading in the wrong direction in that regard. And that would be a shame to not have Juan Soto around long term if this thing continues to kind of teeter in the wrong direction and they can't figure it out.
Yeah, I will not be surprised by season's end if we have three teams in the National League East that are challenging for 90 wins, a team in the Marlins that's trying to go for 500, and the Nationals, I mean, they're being projected for a 90-plus loss season, which would be their first back-to-back since they had three in a row from 2008 to 2010. But I think that's the way that this thing's going to look by season's end. You're going to have those three teams, and it's going to be the most exciting race in baseball, and then you're just going to have the Marlins trying to fight to take that next step. And, who knows what that Nationals roster is going to look like post a trade deadline. But, that's, I think, going to be really fascinating to see. They go out and sign Nelson Cruz. We were all really surprised by that. But how aggressive are they going to be if things start to fall apart very, very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it could go a lot of different ways. And the game's not played on paper. So we're going to find out if we're seeing the right things right now as we read these tea leaves, or if we're just completely off base and the baseball season and the baseball gods have other plans for these teams and all of the storylines that we've thrown out there. But I think the Marlins are a heat seeker, and I think that they could rise in the rankings and rise in the standings. But, again, I still have questions about the Mets and Phillies, and I'm just not going to rule out the fact that, like you said, those two clubs could be neck and neck all year. But are they ever going to get close enough if the Braves play up to their capabilities, what they showed in the second half, how they've really played overall the last 4 years? And, of course, what we saw the Braves do in the postseason to some very good teams. Do any of these clubs in the National League East look like a team that over the course of a season can hang with the Braves if they're firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, the only thing the Braves want to avoid this year is a slow start. Make sure you come along with us all season long in the ride here on Battery Power TV. So get to the Battery Power YouTube channel, turn on those notifications so you get an alert every time that we drop a new episode. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.